Hi, and welcome to the Vocal Fries Podcast, the podcast about linguistic discrimination.
I'm Carrie Gillen.
And I'm Megan Figueroa. I'm a wee bit sick.
Yes.
So.
But at least you have a voice.
Yes, so just in case anyone was wondering.
And people were.
It's the podcasting, it's the life. Sometimes you have to go on the air when you're sick.
We have an email from Jeffrey.
Oh, okay.
Dear Carrie and Megan, I recently finished listening to Practice Makes Easier, and I wanted to tell you how it helped me. I am an attorney specializing in startup companies in the San Francisco Bay Area. As you know, or at least can imagine, this area attracts immigrants from all over the world with high concentrations from China and India, among other places. Many of my clients are founded by and employ a large number of non-native English speakers. At an on-site presentation I gave today, I think I was one of maybe 3 native English speakers in the room. Thinking of the episode, I made a special effort to remember that many folks were not native English speakers. I usually like to think of my job as translating law speak into English, but now I've come to see that maybe there's a second step of translation involved as well. I'm putting an extra effort into being clear as I can and also very, very patient. In other words, try not to be an asshole.
Oh, Jeffrey!
I just thought that you should know that your podcast is actually changing behavior. I enjoy it very much.
Ah!
Although
Sorry.
I sort of hope I wasn't an asshole before I started listening either. Please keep up the good work, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Oh, Jeff. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a little sneak peek behind the scenes again. Carrie was like, I have an email. And I was like, wondering if it was tooting our own horn. And she kind of hinted that yes it is. But I didn't know it would be tooting our horn so good.
Yeah, no, this is really nice. And it's exactly what we want to do in the world, right?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I doubt that people that listen, I like to think that people that listen to our podcast aren't huge assholes, raging assholes in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm sure Jeff was not a huge asshole in the first place, but
right.
I really appreciate that email. Thank you.
Yeah, me too.
And I mean, I too learn from our podcast because of, we have people that we have guests on her for a reason because we don't know everything. So it's definitely made me more thoughtful as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so I like hearing that. And thank you, Dr. Melissa.
Yes.
There was a little Twitter fiasco around a very racist tweet related to language that we missed, that we didn't get to talk about. So luckily someone screenshot it because it was deleted.
Yeah. Well, rightfully so.
Yes, yes.
This is definitely one of those tweets that you should be like, oops.
Yeah, and I think that's what happened. It was because I actually don't know how many people follow this Twitter, but so I'm looking at the screenshot and it's at HS Teach Probs, so teacher problems, high school teacher problems. And it says, I ain't trippin' is probably one of the most annoying phrases a student can say. What are some other annoying phrases your kids say that get under your skin?
Hashtag stuff students say. Hashtag I'm fixing this. Teacher problems.
And then you shared with me someone's lovely tweet. This is at Kaiser Moore. I feel like all the white teachers saying that African-American vernacular English is annoying should be removed from predominantly black schools. They're clearly holding prejudice against the students they are supposed to be there to help. Which, absolutely.
Yeah, so the reason why I even saw this was because someone else quote tweeted it and said something like, all teachers should be removed, from all schools. Oh. Any teacher who has these ideas should be removed from all schools. And I was like, you're right. Yes, it's more of a problem when you're in a class with Black children, but if you're infecting children with these ideas, regardless of their race, it's very problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be coming through in whatever you do then. If obviously, when you think that you hold different ways of speaking above each other, and as we've learned on the show, that means that you are holding people above each other. You're creating a hierarchy here, and you're passing that on if you believe that. If you're teaching kids from that point of view.
And if we want to fight white supremacy, the biggest source of it is white people, right? So
yes,
we want the white kids not to pick up on these ideas.
Absolutely.
And granted, obviously there's going to be other places where they can, but at least in the school, we should be helping them.
I know.
pick up these ideas.
It sucks though, because that's still the biggest population of teachers, just from the way that things have shaken out, is white women.
Yes. There are a variety of reasons for that.
Yep.
But because it used to be at least more gender balanced, but then the pay was so bad.
Yep.
Men won't do it anymore. And then, yeah, there's obviously reasons why it's mostly white women. Obviously, not all white women are going to have these kinds of racist ideas, but many do. And
right. Let us hope that there are some that hold this view that when told, they're like, oh shit.
That was a bad thing to say. Think. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope that because they deleted the tweet, they realized how bad it actually was.
Yeah, and not just because they were like, I don't want to
deal with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's sad for me because this is a reminder. I don't think that this is uncommon. That's the problem.
No, it's not. It's incredibly common. I mean, we know this. I didn't get this exact message from my classes, but from my teachers, but, something kind of like it, that there were correct ways of speaking and correct ways of writing. And yeah, there was like hidden anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity and anti-everything else in there. It was just more subtle.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, it's not an innocuous thing to say I ain't tripping. I hate when my students say that. This is not innocuous. This is like part of a much bigger problem. I don't know what the message is here. Just the message that we always have, I guess. Don't be an asshole.
Yeah, at the very least, keep your bad ideas about language to yourself, because it's not helping you, and it's not helping the kids that you teach, and it's not helping the communities around you. Just stop.
I know. And think about it a little bit about where this is coming from or why you might think this.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We all have things to unpack. All of us.
Yes.
All of us have grown up with bad ideas about language in particular and other things in general.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got to work through it, but like don't work through it on Twitter.
I know. Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, this episode is really fun and uplifting.
Yeah. It almost sounds like we never have anything fun or uplifting to say when you let's preface this by saying, hey, this is a fun, uplifting episode today.
I guess they're usually at least somewhat uplifting. I just thought there's just something even more uplifting about this one because it's it's like the Living Languages episode, right?
Absolutely.
It's about Wikitongues, which allows people to upload their own language, video or audio, although they encourage video. So people can at least record what their language is actually like right now, regardless of what it was like in the past, regardless of what it'll be like in the future. Just a snapshot, and it's just, I love it.
I love it too. And it's a reminder that language is living, and it's okay that it changes.
Language will always change no matter what you try to do. Colonization had this huge impact on many different languages, and I don't want to ignore that, but it is what it is. And languages would have changed even if that hadn't happened.
Right. Yep. And to have a little place on the internet to celebrate what your language sounds like now is lovely.
Yeah.
Like this show and want to make your own? Let me tell you about Anchor. It's free, and they have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And now you can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
so today we have Daniel Bogri-Udell, who's the co-founder of Wikitongues, a non-profit organization that aims to document all of the world's languages. So welcome, Daniel.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Excited to talk about this today. I have heard of Wikitongues, but I don't know much about it. I don't know anything actually. I don't know how old or young. You're going to tell us all about that, right?
That's what I'm here for. It's funny. I've been following Vocal Fries on Twitter for a while, and so Carrie, when I found out that you and I would be on that show together, I was excited because it was an opportunity to meet you too.
Yeah, that was an interesting experience. It was really strange being on a TV show that will be shown soon, I think.
Yes.
But it was all very professional, and there's a panel, and I was way far away here in Phoenix, and that was in London, I believe.
It was my first remote talking head experience, actually.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, wow. And was it a BBC thing?
No, it was a Turkish news channel. I don't remember what it was called. Do you remember, Daniel?
Off the top of my head, I do not. Well, the show itself was called Roundtable, but right. I don't remember what the network was.
Okay. Well, very cool. We'll have to share that when it comes out.
Definitely. So, yeah, tell us a little bit about Wikitongues. So, how old is it? Why did you start it, etc.?
Sure. Wikitongues started in 2014 as a nonprofit initiative to crowdsource documentation in every language. We started with oral histories because that is a kind of linguistic documentation that is easy to do without a lot of training or advanced equipment. Pretty much anybody with a smartphone or with access to a smartphone can produce them. And we did that for two reasons. One, language revitalization is only possible when accessible documentation is available in the language in question. And from a question of representation and inclusion, we thought it would be an interesting online project to try and represent every language in the world, which is in effect representing every culture in the world. As we grew, we started to get the question, how do I save my language? Which is an incredibly loaded question, and one to which there really isn't a systemic answer despite all the work on language revitalization over the past few decades. And so starting this year, we're actually teaming up with the Living Tongues Institute for Endangered Languages to build a toolkit for people who want to get started with language activism in their communities. And the idea is giving people a framework to do a health check on their language. So if you are worried about the future of your language, you can actually assess what it needs, because different languages need different things, right? If your language has already been documented and the community has that documentation, maybe what you actually need is a framework for community organizing to keep it relevant for young people, right? Or maybe your language actually is undocumented or underdocumented, and you actually need to start from the beginning with oral histories, dictionaries, whatever. And so the idea is to give people the framework for doing this health check, and then a roadmap to achieving what needs to be achieved. Because over the past 30 years, there has been a groundswell of language activism around the world, and there are successful cases of languages being revitalized, or perhaps a better way to put it is there are successful cases of cultures keeping their languages alive. People asserting their cultural sovereignty. There are universal lessons there, we think, that can be applied, because there are, cases of languages being revitalized with the help of a government, and there are cases of languages being revitalized in an entirely unfunded and grassroots way with no institutional support. And then there are cases where people have attempted to keep their languages alive and not succeeded, right? And so our hope is to be able to kind of build a very wide and open front door to the process of language activism.
So you said crowdsourced, and I think sometimes I'm always skeptical when I hear that, because it's like, it's so sad in the US how we have to crowdsource like people's medical bills and all this stuff. But this is one of those things where I feel like crowdsourcing is the right thing to do. Like, that way that the community can be involved, and you may hear from groups that we didn't know that wanted some outside help or whatever, or these like frameworks to work with. So I like the idea that the internet can be used for crowdsourcing in this way, especially when we get kind of jaded when we see all the ways where it's kind of sad that we have to crowdsource things.
Yeah, the internet is powerful technology, and all powerful technology has good and bad application. In this case, I think it's good application. What we're doing would not be possible without the internet, and there are, the past few years has been one really positive thing from the past few years is that increasingly more and more people have access to internet. It's not always stable, it's not always good, but for the first time they have it. And what's interesting is, every now and then we'll get contacted by someone who just got internet, like in their town, and the internet's not very good yet, but they want to contribute soon. There was someone who reached out to us from the interior of Papua New Guinea. And so, one of the first things that he wanted to do was see if there are, other people around the world that are concerned about this. And he found that there were. And so it's a very, very exciting thing that makes me very optimistic. And I really am pretty confident that the internet is going to be a really positive thing for marginalized peoples, because it offers a way to organize around your language when your community has been culturally displaced.
It's been great to see, for example, on Twitter, people using their language, just tweeting in their language and not using the dominant language, which has been really fun.
Absolutely. And it really creates an opportunity for breathing space for your language. Because one of the most challenging thing for language revitalization movements is, if your community has been culturally displaced, it becomes almost impossible to use your language in the ancestral homeland because it's been displaced by a more dominant one. And with the internet, you can circumvent that and, create WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups and other, online forums where you can use the language on a daily basis without the pressure of a locally dominant one. And that's an increasingly common tactic among language activists, and it usually leads to good results.
What has been one of your favorite results that you've been a part of?
That's a really good question. We're just starting to scratch the surface of support for language activist movement. So I would feel very uncomfortable, necessarily giving Wikitongues credit for an actual language revitalization initiative. We have definitely been a platform for people looking to amplify some of their amplify their work. And, I don't want to say I have a favorite, but some of the ones from the past year that have been particularly meaningful to me is the Kihunde language in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It only has about 200,000 speakers. Children are learning it, but, it's very underdocumented and has no institutional support. And Wikitongues has been a channel for a man named Hongi Bulebe, who is at the center of this effort to keep the language alive, teach it to children, standardize it, and all that. And he said that being able to share the language on a global platform like Wikitongues has helped accelerate work for him, because he says, look, when people in the community, look at him skeptically, he says, well, look, people from other countries care about our language. Why can't we? And that, he said, has resonated with people. I met him in person for the first time in Rwanda a couple months ago, and this was one of the things he said, which was just fabulous. Another movement that we have been a platform for amplifying is and really that I just feel privileged to get to be close to is the effort to revitalized the Tunica language of Louisiana, which went dormant in 1948. And if you haven't had any of the members of that community on your show, you should definitely invite them, because they're doing really, really cool work, and they love sharing it with the rest of the world. And that they're one of the languages that prompted Ethnologue to add a reawakening category to the language vitality scale, because the language went dormant in 1948. And in the 1980s, a woman named Donna Pierite decided that she wanted to revitalize it. And that was partly because her husband is Choctaw. He was learning Choctaw, and, Choctaw is a language that is, still being taught to children and still spoken natively. And she paused and said, wait, we don't actually have our language anymore, but we had one. And so she would go to Baton Rouge in Louisiana and New Orleans to photocopy old dictionaries and grammars and things that were kind of stored away in university archives. And she brought the language home that way and made it a family activity. So, she reclaimed Tunica, taught it to her children. And for a long time, they were kind of like, they were the movement, like their family was the movement to revitalize Tunica. And in the 90s, they started sending out newsletters, physical newsletters, because, the internet mailing lists were still fresh technology, and other families started to get involved in that way. And something happened in the late 2010 or something, like around that year, where they got some support, academic support, from linguists in New Orleans, and over that next few years, they were able to convince the tribal government to actually allocate funding and resources for the program. And now I think upwards of 10% of the tribe is enrolled in language immersion, and they have 32 new fluent speakers, hence the new reawakening category. And this is very inspiring to me personally. One of my more immediate ancestral languages is Yiddish, which means I also kind of have a connection to the Hebrew language, which went dormant in the 2nd century and was revitalized in the 1800s by Jewish activists at that time. And for a long time, that was the only instance of a dormant language being reclaimed by its people. And the Tunica are another case of that. In so enthusiastically promoting their work online and around the world, I think it's a source of inspiration for other people. And so those are two cases that I have that I feel very grateful to have been close to.
I know people are in their communities doing work, but sometimes the help or support they need is really just amplification, which is really great that Wikitongues can do something like that. And those are really good examples of it, because maybe the framework that they need is just how can I get a bigger audience to hear our oral histories? Because, this is something that we want to share, or we just want people to know what we're doing. And so it's really great that that's where Wikitongues is coming from, because linguists have gone into communities and kind of been like this savior type people. Like, they try to be the savior type people, or like force things on people. And I know just linguistics has this terrible history. So it's really lovely to hear something where it's like, this is about the people and what they need or what they want. And sometimes that's just sharing.
There's one language activist in Scotland. His name's Adam O'Brien. And if either of you watched that Showtime show Outlander, he's the Gaelic dialect coach for that show. And he's very, very intent on keeping alive his dialect, or his variety of Scottish Gaelic, which is moribund, or classified as moribund. Scottish Gaelic obviously is not classified as moribund. But, he is linguistically trained, right? He is actually a linguist, which is how he's a dialect coach. And so he's very able to do the documentation work. Like, that is not a challenge for him. For him, he said his biggest desire is just to talk to other people who are doing this work, because sometimes it can be lonely. And so there's a huge community building and solidarity aspect to it. I do want to say that, at least in my experience over the past several years, there's been like a huge shift in linguistics to support, to be the discipline that supports people in this work. And I think it's especially like the new generation of linguists are doing incredible work. The question is, how can we standardize some of these processes? Like, the Tunica did something correct, right? And that can be replicated, not exactly the same way, because every community has different needs, right? But there are universal lessons that everyone can have, because, you know, there just aren't enough field linguists in the world to help everybody who needs help. And so it needs to be thought of in these systemic terms. And I'm excited that there is, that we can be part of that conversation, and hopefully actually behind some producing materials that can be useful to people.
Well, I really like the idea that people can be their own community's field linguists. So that's something that can facilitate that, because you're right that there aren't enough like PhD field linguists that can go everywhere or have the particular skills for a particular community. But the idea that you could be your own community's field linguist is really great. It's funny because I've been thinking, I don't know, all these think pieces about the new decade and like, has the internet ruined us? And like, what has the internet done in the last 10 years? And it's nice to hear these stories of how the internet can actually make the world smaller in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very optimistic. I think like the internet obviously has its problems, but I worry that a lot of the critiques of the internet come from like jaded people who live in places that have had the internet for a very long time and who just like spend too much time on like
Twitter,
following people on yeah, and I love Twitter, but
too.
like you can unfollow people if they're annoying, like if not, and so much of this is like, you know, nobody who just got the internet last year is mad about it,
right? Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I, like a little global context would be nice beyond partisan arguments on Twitter are mean-spirited,
right.
And therefore the internet sucks. And and so much of the critique is that, and it's just so limited and is, you know, unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of bad actors on the internet, but it's true that it's in some ways you can make your experience better by blocking the ones that are for sure bad actors and focusing on the ones that are good.
Yeah.
Which is what I do try to do. But
right. And there have been bad actors since before the internet.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, it's just because the internet's so powerful, it's really easy to use in a bad way, just like it's really easy to use in a good way. So let's focus on the good.
That's right. It's like nuclear technology. Double-edged sword.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Why is this work so important?
Why is this work I think this work is important because language is the vehicle of expression for communities. And so when a language disappears, it means that a community has collapsed. You know, I saw this BBC headline the other day that was, and it was just a headline, I'm sure, I didn't actually read the article, but the fact that this is the headline that got written as it did is so indicative of how the discourse around this stuff needs to improve. It was like, yeah, Yiddish used to have, 10 million speakers in Europe, and now those numbers have depleted.
Oh, no.
And right, and it's like, no, there was a genocide that murdered everybody. And so when people and like what we're talking about is Ashkenazi Jews in Europe were the victims of a massive genocide. That's why the Yiddish speakers have depleted. And that's how we talk about all these languages. Like, Lakota isn't a dying language. Lakota is a language that is, taking work to be kept alive because the community has been at the blunt end of genocide, land theft, ethnic cleansing, and other forms of systemic racism. So language revitalization is a way for, communities who have been marginalized to assert themselves on the global stage, right? It's about so much. It's about justice, right? It's about reparation, and that's why I think it's most important. And then there's this kind of more intangible question of knowledge, right? Because in languages, there's like almost always unique vocabulary, which sometimes have, biological application, which is why there are fields in biology that work with local language speakers to accelerate conservation. There's, language it contains prehistories, right? Like we know about the Bantu migration and the Bering Strait migration in part because of how languages, change across vast geographies. It's so important. It intersects with everything.
I'm so glad that you brought up the point about Lakota is not dying, or to call a language, or to say that a language is dying. I've heard a lot of people starting to say that they don't like to hear this kind of language around a language, like saying it's dying. And I think that's such a good point, because I've been thinking a lot about intergenerational trauma. And so even like, say, the Jewish people that did survive the Holocaust and did speak Yiddish, there may be some trauma there that makes you not want to pass on a language. And I see that in Spanish in this like American Southwest. I'm learning more about this and how that's happening in Ireland and with the Irish language. To remember that things have been done, or horrible atrocities have been done to people, and what happens with language is kind of the consequence.
Knock-on effect.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's so important for people to kind of sit and think about.
Yeah, so that also, the thought I had was, I didn't realize until really recently, because I am not Jewish, but I don't know, like a year or two ago, someone posted something about, did you know that in 1939 there were more Jewish people on the planet than there are now? And yeah. I just couldn't even, I couldn't even believe it. I mean, I believed it, obviously, but you know what I mean? It was just like, oh my God, that's so true. Like, obviously that's true as soon as you say that. But yeah, so the tie-in with Yiddish is also very important. And we really need to talk about these things differently. I know some of the languages change towards sleeping or dormant, but that still doesn't get at the heart of it, which is what you're talking about, Daniel, which is like, this is a result of genocide, usually.
Or if not genocide, at least like, forced assimilation, right? Like, the Occitan people weren't necessarily victims of physical genocide in France, but there was a concerted effort by the French government to erase Occitanian or Occitan identity, culture, and language and forcibly make them French. And how did they do that? They beat children in school who were speaking Occitan. They forbade the use of Occitan in, the public sphere. And, lo and behold, within a generation, people kind of had their culture squeezed out of them. And that's like the nicest case.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring up the intergenerational trauma, because there is this other kind of counter discourse that I hear sometimes, which is that, well, if the community doesn't want to teach their language to their kids anymore, that's, their choice. And, like, going back to the Yiddish case, because that's like my personal one, it's like, there's a reason that my dad wasn't taught Yiddish. It's because, Ashkenazi Jews fled Europe, and they either went to Israel, where they said, we're going to speak Hebrew now and reclaim this ancient language, or we're going to go somewhere else and assimilate. And if we assimilate, they'll be nice to us.
Exactly. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
It's sad. Language is about so much more, right? I was talking to another person who should get on the show. Her name's Haley Dadar. I forget how to pronounce her last name. She's from the Homa community in Louisiana. And, their language, when it went dormant, potentially problematic description, but for lack of a better phrasing, it was undocumented. Unlike Tunica, there were no complete dictionaries and grammars gathering dust in libraries. And so they're in the middle of reconstructing Homa before they can consider reclaiming it. And, when I asked her what her end goal was, it's like, do you one day want this to be the kind of mother tongue again of Homa people? And she said, maybe. But I just want us all to, feel Homa.
Yeah.
Right.
And like not forget. And that's really what the core is. It's, revitalizing language is about, community. It's about history. It's about your ancestors, your descendants, your place on earth.
Yeah. And the stories about who you are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think about it because I've talked about before how I feel like I was like Spanish was forcibly removed from my generation. But Spanish is always going to be there for me when I want to learn it. It won't be like perhaps not my family's Spanish, but it'll be there for me. Whereas these languages, are they going to be there? That's the question. And we want them to be there. But again, just this horrible ways that we have treated other human beings, where we've got to the point where we are, where there are some languages that are, for lack of a better word, dormant. it's not true for everyone that language will be there for them, unfortunately.
Right. And that's why the documentation side of things is so important. We have one oral history of a language from Vanuatu called Lemreg, and it has 2 known speakers. And from what I understand, there isn't really any active movement to revitalize the language and the culture. If in 30 years there emerges that desire, it's important that the language be there for the community to bring it back. You know, with the Tunica case, the last native speaker was the chief, Sesustri Unigan, I think was his name. You can ask them when you bring
yes, we will.
Lisbeth or Donna or Jean-Luc or any of them on the show. And, he worked with a linguist named Mary Haas to produce dictionaries and grammars because he knew that he had to leave the language behind for the next generation. And it took, 30 years, but, he passed away in 1948, and it was the 80s when Donna Pierre started this movement again. So, thank goodness it was there. Thank goodness he did that. Like, the documentation is so important and the first step, really.
Yeah, it's the first step that it's necessary but not sufficient.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I'm convinced that there's actually been a huge shift in the history of cultural diversity over the past couple of years, and we're just starting to realize what that is. Because, I think we this statistic that half the languages in the world are going to disappear in 80 years keeps getting touted, and that statistic is from the 90s.
Yes.
And even then there were different estimations. But let's be charitable and say this estimation was correct. That was the 90s, right? Like, there was no Tunica revitalization. Well, I guess they had started, but it was still like a couple families, right? There are just a lot of cases of languages being in a better position, and cultures, really, communities being in a better position now than they were in the 90s. And so I think that, there are probably cases of others being worse, so maybe it's, the net is not any better. That's part of what makes this so hard, because it's so vast a scale.
Yeah. It's really hard to estimate, how many languages really are, under extreme threat or just a little bit of threat. It's hard to really know for sure, because no one person has that amount of information. We can't possibly know.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's why I think another thing that needs to happen for an infrastructure to sustain cultural diversity at scale is, beyond there being these systems or these frameworks for people to do the work in their communities, there needs to be a better survey method that's more frequent, more consistent.
Yeah, because even census data isn't that good. It's really good, but it's not very frequent, and it's not that deep.
And it's different from each country, right? Or,
Yeah, so, exactly. Each country does it differently.
Yeah. And when you look at Ethnologue or Glottolog, right, they work with what they have. This is no knock on them, but sometimes you'll see the last datum about this language is 1980, and it's cool. That's where this language was, 40 years ago. A lot can happen in 40 years. I was having a conversation with a Shanghainese person. And she's a heritage, or that's her heritage language. She doesn't really speak it. She's American, I think. But she was like, how long until Shanghainese dies? And I was like, well, damn, that's a question. And I was like, but it's not even classified as endangered. Maybe it's not. Maybe this is just her perception. Or maybe she's getting news from relatives back home that the language is not spoken anywhere near like it was 10 years ago. And the census isn't even caught up with that. And of course, Beijing is not going to be taking censuses about this stuff, because they're one of the few countries that is still actively working to assimilate minorities. And so this stuff is really messy. It's hard to, but there needs to be a better survey method that would probably rely on self-reporting, but which is its own unreliable can of worms.
Yeah, but I think it's the best that we would have in this instance, because there might only be one speaker, and so who else is going to report it but that one person?
Exactly. And there would also have to be a way to report and track language revitalization. That would be, okay, there's a new initiative on the ground, and then also keep track of all the different ones, right? Because the Tunica case is really interesting. It's got incredible momentum over the past 10 years, but for the first 20 years, it's just a few really persistent people. And so there's a lot of variables to track, I think.
Well, and of course, most of these languages do not have institutional support. So with institutional support would come perhaps some better numbers on things, but that's not what's happening. That's not the reality.
No.
I'm curious about the Yiddish case. So I know there was a revitalization effort. Is that still ongoing? And if so, are you involved in that at all?
Not yet. I'm decided that I'm gonna start with. I'm learning Hebrew right now, and once I get conversational, I'll move over to Yiddish. And the reason I did that is just because all Jewish languages are Hebrew plus something else, right? And so I was like, I'll start with the oldest one. There's a certain kind of ancestral quality to it that has drawn me to it. And I will learn Yiddish when I get a little more proficient in Hebrew. There is a lot of Yiddish activism right now because for a long period, the only community that really kept it alive were the different Orthodox communities in North America, right? There was a secular. What was really depleted, as the BBC said, was the kind of secular Yiddish world, right? Which was lively and had theater and literature and all this stuff. And there is a movement to bring that back. A lot of young, especially like diaspora Jews in North America, are starting to rediscover that because, it really is the one that we can go back a couple generations and find an elder, like an ancestor speaking. And in fact, another guest you should get on this show is a woman named Sandy Fox, and she lives between Tel Aviv and New York, and she's part of that whole movement, and she actually runs a feminist podcast in Yiddish.
Cool.
Oh, very cool.
Definitely to have her on.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, she's great. And so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that's definitely happening. But what's interesting is because the Orthodox communities, especially here in New York City, they kept the language alive. It was there for the rest of us, as you put it, Megan, because they had kept the language alive. It was there for the rest of us when we were ready to come back.
As a kid, so I'm very millennial age, and the internet came around for me when I was like 8 or 9. And the best part about it is it wasn't Google then, but whatever kind of search engine I had, I could ask questions like, is Yiddish still spoken? Because I remember watching Laverne and Shirley and being like, what is this? What did they say? Like Shlemiel, Shemazel?
Shlemiel, Shemazel, Hasenbemp Incorporated.
And I was like, what is that? So being able to finally ask, because I was just this kid in Phoenix, Arizona, didn't have, I knew Mexican culture and that's about it, So I didn't know whether Yiddish was spoken or was it fake? This is where I was at 8, based on who was around me. And so I'm just so happy that kids these days, or anyone, I mean, I'm not saying you have to be a kid not to know whether, how, if Yiddish is spoken and where, to be able to go to the internet and be like, tell me, just how powerful knowledge is about language.
Exactly. It's
Absolutely.
History, which is interesting and important. So your ancestral language is Spanish?
Yes. Yeah. Well, my dad speaks Spanish, and I have traced it back 5 generations to Sonora, Mexico, my family.
Incredible. And do you speak it now?
A little bit. I'm more receptive, so I can understand it. I get really skittish about speaking it because I have this shame of people expecting me to have more, the knowledge that they expect of me because of my last name or because my dad spoke it. That's where, my baggage is at.
And there's also a lot of shaming from other people, oh, you don't speak the real Spanish. It makes it hard.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that stuff is so toxic. And, we'll get comments on our YouTube channel a lot in that vein. This person is not speaking the language well. And it's well, okay, of course not, because look at the history of how this person got access to their language. Calm down. Be celebrate kind. That they speak it.
Right.
Sorry that it has some loan words from the dominant language, but our thing is always okay, then you send a video. And sometimes the people do, and sometimes they go away.
Yeah. That's a really good response.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. because that's our thing, right? Like, we're not policing authenticity.
Nor should you.
Right.
How would you?
It's funny how kind of like ubiquitous the desire to police authenticity is, though, because we get those comments from like a wide range of communities on every continent. There's always that person who says, this person's not speaking well. And I get the desire to keep the language alive in its like most robust state, right? Because it probably has better vocabulary than the loan words that this person is using, but like celebrate that they still speak it.
Well, there's also dialect differences too that sometimes people either forget about or don't want to admit exist. So like you come from the wrong family. Yeah. Oh, that means you're not speaking correctly. I've definitely encountered that as well.
That's why I like to use the pronouns like my Spanish. So this is what my Spanish is, or that's what your French is. Like, I think it gets around that because, again, I do have these insecurities, but it's like, no, this one's mine. And so I try to remember that when people are cruel. But it's true. The policing comes from inside the community, outside the community. Yeah, it's everywhere. So people send videos to Wikitongues.
Yes.
Oh, that's so cool. So I mean, I'm sure there's just audio recordings as well, but to see videos, that's what a great like resource to have.
Video is important because it puts a face to the language. It makes the evidence of language and culture a little more explicit, and it's also necessary if you're looking at every language, because at least 300 of the world's languages are signed. Right. And you cannot have audio.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nope.
No, exactly. That's exactly the point I was getting to. Is I'm so glad that they're video because yes, and myself, I probably made this mistake growing up too. A lot of Americans think that ASL is the signed language, but there are so many signed languages.
In my travels, I found this to be a global misconception.
Yes.
Everyone, oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, not ASL exactly, but most people think that just like there is a sign language.
Yeah.
That all people who are deaf in the whole world speak somehow. And then when you say, no, they all have different languages, people have a hard time processing that until you say, well, there's different spoken languages and it's the same thing. And they go, oh.
Yep.
Yeah, this is probably the most common misconception about language that I've encountered as well, is that there's one sign language. Yeah. For once, it's not just Americans.
Oh, yeah.
I always like to drag Americans under the bus.
Well, it's more
just
American
a recreational
than that.
activity. I know, right? I do it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I just think it's great because, like I said, I've learned so much. I'm obviously a trained linguist now, but the internet's helped me so much to learn about language that I hope our podcast does that as well, because I think there are a lot of things that people might be too scared to ask. And I like to remind everyone that I am very naive. I'm still, in my 30 plus years and after a PhD program, I'm still very naive. And I think that
we can't possibly know everything.
Yeah, you can't be ashamed. Like if you didn't, if you have to go and Google like where's Yiddish spoken after this, that's okay.
In fact, I encourage you to do so because you will learn something for sure.
Exactly. It's totally fine. People always get confused about because they don't understand that there's like multiple Jewish languages, and so they'll be like they confuse Yiddish and Hebrew a lot. And I'm like, no, they're very different. One's close to Arabic and one's close to German. And, and then when you go, and there's also Ladino and Judeo-Arabic and Judeo-Farsi and Judeo-Malayalam, which is one that I just learned about recently and I'd never even known about existing. And it's like, okay, because I think that's the other thing. I think when people they get like really intimidated because culture is so vast. And they don't want to be perceived as ignorant, or they don't want to offend people. A lot of eggshell walking, and it's like, no, just ask the questions. As long as you're being respectful, it's fine. No one should be expected to know everything.
No, it's impossible.
Right.
Yeah, how are you supposed to know it until you learn it?
And it's impossible to know everything. It's just impossible. So, like, just learning a little bit every day, that's good.
Exactly. Learn one new thing every day.
Yeah.
I think that's a good life lesson.
Yeah, I think it is too. It's also a great plug for listening to the Vocal Fries. Look at how you're learning.
By the way, I love your name. That was how because I actually found you through Twitter, because I'm not an avid podcast listener. But I remember when I saw that, I was like, follow.
Yeah.
I'm pretty proud of that.
Are your listeners like prompted on the whole vocal fry?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't get hate mail about our voices.
That's
so
true.
I think that is also a really good thing, is like, okay, we're coming right out and our name is the Vocal Fries, and we're about like linguistic discrimination. Don't shit on how either one of us talk.
It's true. It's true. You have kind of a built-in defense barrier, which is pretty cool.
Yep. And I hope it makes our customers, our guests,
What?
our guests feel comfortable too, because they're like, you're safe in this space.
Yeah. No shaming allowed.
There's no language shaming here. That's
no
for
language
sure.
shaming, baby.
Yep, exactly.
How can people support Wikitongues?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a lot. We've only worked with about 500 language communities. I've kind of been off the grid for the past few days, taking long walks and recovering from New Year's. And so the number's probably a little higher now. I mean, it's like 504 or something. But that's, only 14% of every known culture. And so there is an endless amount of contribution still to be done to this, seed bank of linguistic and cultural diversity. So please send us videos of your language, whatever that language is and however you speak it. We love all dialects, sociolects, idiolects, accents. And then, of course, you can also donate to Wikitongues, wikitongues.org/donate, or if you're a Patreon user, you can make a monthly pledge on Patreon. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, which also helps. So Wikitongues is a nonprofit. All contributions are tax deductible, and they go primarily to supporting the documentation work, or now also research on language revitalization, as we work with the Living Tongues Institute to build this toolkit. And finally, we have grown almost entirely organically over the past 5 years. And so word of mouth is also an insanely valuable contribution to building the community that we've built. So talk about us to your friends. Help make the name known more around the world.
Again, I feel a little naive because you've been around for about 5 years now, and I just never pursued you further, and I feel guilty now. But I'm glad to know you now. Like, that helps, right?
Oh, yeah. Hey, I never messaged you guys. I never tried to slide into the Twitter DM.
Hey.
We're on the same, right?
Yeah.
It's
Which you definitely could have. We encourage people to try to let us know if they have something interesting to talk about.
So DMs are open.
It'd be a fun way to contribute now that I've just spent time with family that I actually, like. I know not everyone likes their family because family. But you could do that with your elders, is ask them to contribute, and you can do it yourself. You can help them. You can use your smartphone. It's a way to preserve some of your family's culture too.
Absolutely. That's something that I should have clarified a moment ago. Send us your language, but you can also send us your friend's language too. You can send us your neighbor's language. You can send us, you can help people to participate. There was one volunteer in our very early days named Plat Torgashi from Kosovo, and he traveled all up and down the Baltics and must have contributed like oral histories in like up to 30 or 40 different languages.
Wow. That's very cool.
Yeah, he is a remarkable individual. But it doesn't have to be you speaking, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because I know some people might be shy. You don't have to do a video either, right? It could be audio only.
It could be audio. We won't publish it on YouTube if it's just audio, but we will archive it. And we're on the verge of rolling out an accessible archive on our website, so you can actually browse every video we've ever done, which is a long time in the making. But when you're a nonprofit, resources are limited and tech is resource intensive. We also are on the verge of rolling out templates for other kinds of documentation, like phrase books, word lists. And if you do want to send us videos in the meantime, these templates are not yet out, but if you want to send us videos, just head over to wikitongues.org and you will see submit a video in the toolbar. And And there's a form to fill out and a Google form if that doesn't work.
Awesome. And we'll be
Really
happy
cool.
to update our listeners whenever y'all make progress on new templates or projects.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot this year. And I am grateful to have kicked it off with the vocal fries. Thank you for... Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you
it was
so much.
lovely to meet you virtually.
You too.
Hey, oh, do you know how to say "don't be an asshole"?
No, not yet.
That would be high level.
Not yet. That's fine. It's fine. One day.
That's a great thing to learn how to say in a language. That should be like
Yes.
a core phrase book. We should add that to
I
our
agree.
phrase book template.
You
Yes,
should.
you should.
Even if you make it slightly nicer and just say jerk, I still think it's an important thing for people to be able to say.
Right.
Yeah. Or be nice.
Or
Something
be
like
nice.
that.
But be
Yeah.
nice is probably already in there, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But
anyway.
don't be an asshole is like more fun though, right? Like,
It is way
It
more
is.
fun.
right?
Yes. That's why we always tell our listeners to not be an asshole. And they know we mean it with love.
Yes. It's also feels more like boundary enforcing, which is sometimes really important.
I can see that. Yeah. Huh.
Anyway,
I never
Yes.
thought it that way.
And on that
So
note,
don't be an asshole.
don't be an asshole. Okay, so we would like to thank our newest patrons for this month.
Yay.
Russell Lee Goldman,
Hey.
Paige Andrews,
Yay.
Jeff Goldman,
Yay.
and Ellen Perleberg, or Perlberg. It's probably Perlberg. I went a little French
Yay.
there.
I love seeing names that I recognize from Twitter.
Yeah, me too.
Yay, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And if anyone still listening would like to support us, we have $2, $3, and $5 levels. $2 level, you get a thank you. $3 level, you get a sticker. Actually, you get multiple stickers. You get a sticker every few months. And $5 level, you get the stickers and our bonus episodes.
Yes, and our latest one is about child language, and I get real salty. So does Carrie.
So do I, but you do more so because it is your
Yeah.
it is your area.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you so much, and we'll
See you next time.
see you in a couple weeks.
The Vocal Fries podcast is produced by me, Carrie Gillen, for Halftone Audio. Theme music by Nick Granum. You can find us on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Vocal Fries Pod. You can email us at vocalfriespod@gmail.com, and our website is vocalfriespod.com.